Hi, my name's Mary and I'm a very grateful sober alcoholic, one day at a time. First of all, I'd like to say hi to Dennis and what a great job you're doing here. It's really good. Thank you for allowing me to share my story today about how it was and what happened and how it is now. I was born into a family with two alcoholic parents. My dad was an ex-serviceman who was much older than my mother. You know, I just remember a lot of fighting and, being left alone in the house and things like that. And by the time I was 5, I had a 4-year-old sister and a 3-year-old sister. My dad suicided while he was drunk in the house. That left Mum to look after us, who was 25 years younger than Dad, and all of a sudden she's got all these kids on her own, and she's an alcoholic and a pill-popping drug addict. One night she left us in the house alone. Well, it was more than one night, it was a few days apparently, so the records state, and neighbours called the police, and we were removed from the house and taken into care and made wards of the state. After that, we ended up, because our dad was a returned soldier, we were legacy children. So we went into a legacy children's home, and that's where I spent the next 15 years in care. I never drank, didn't take drugs. There was no alcohol in our life in that legacy home. We weren't exposed to alcohol, but little did I know that it was sitting there just waiting, biding its time. So I ended up running away from there after my two younger sisters had already run away, and they were living on the streets in St Kilda in Melbourne. My second younger sister ended up dying from a drug overdose at 17. And that triggered me to start using drugs, which is quite strange. You think it would have the opposite effect, but it didn't. So for the next 4 years, I used heroin. Ultimately, I got in a lot of trouble with the police, and I had warrants out for my arrest, and I was looking at doing 4 years jail time minimum for trafficking. So I jumped on a plane and flew up to Kununurra in Western Australia, because I figured that was the furthest place from Melbourne, And that day was the last day that I ever used heroin, but it was also the first day I ever picked up a drink. I went out with some people I'd met in Kununurra that night to the sports club and drank, and I really enjoyed, the first few drinks, and I was quite excited because I thought, wow, this is makes me feel how I want to feel, and it makes me feel like I fit in, and made me feel, I wasn't shy, I wasn't afraid. I just loved it, and it was illegal. It was actually legal to take it. So, the next morning, everyone told me how much fun I'd been, and they all had a ball with me, and I'd hardly remember. I must have went into blackout, the first time I got drunk, but I felt like I was home. I really loved it, it just gave me that feeling that I've been chasing for years and years. Anyway, I went on to having a couple of children and getting married in Kununurra to another alcoholic, By now, I wasn't the life of the party anymore, and people wouldn't even invite me to their parties, because I'd become a aggro, nasty drunk, not happy-go-lucky Mary that I started off as being. I managed to stay in that marriage for about a year. And, the going got tough, so Mary got going, and I took off again. Took off to Perth and moved in with another drug user, and the kids were just shattered. But I sort of managed to tame it for a little while. I got a job working for the Commonwealth Government that I bluffed my way into in a managerial position up in Bunbury near Perth, and stayed there for many, many years. So the kids had a really nice home, They went to really good schools, and the problem was, I wasn't emotionally available for these children. I was that mother that used to go to the sports carnivals or the concerts at school and awards nights and stuff with wine in a drink bottle and just doing all that sort of stuff that I was doing. And, I thought I was bluffing everyone, but years later I found out that everyone actually knew I was doing it. It's funny to look back on now. Yeah, of course they knew. So, it's basically as soon as the kids were old enough, they fled from home and went on and started their own lives, which gave me open slather to pretty much drink how I wanted to. So there I was again, back drinking full on. I mean, at this stage, I drank daily anyway. From the first day I drank in Kununurra, I drank daily. I even drank through my pregnancies, which I'm really ashamed of. But, thank goodness my children didn't suffer any damage from that. Yeah, that's just shocking, that was. Yeah, so the kids have gone from home and I'm still working at this job, and I was taking more and more days off because my drinking was escalating, and I was coming up with excuses that was so pathetic, saying my dog got run over, my mum died twice. A friend at work said to me, "Mary, you said that last year that your mum had died," and I thought it was funny at the time, but it's not really funny at all. And so when you work for the Commonwealth Government, it's really hard to get the sack, basically. You have to steal from them or whatever. So they sort of couldn't get rid of me. So this is my take on it anyway. So they offered me a redundancy package, saying that my role as the office manager had become redundant in the company. So I got a huge payout. I got a lot of money, and I thought, wow, this is great. I can. My plan was to go on a cruise first, and then take a year off and just drink, because why not? That's perfect. And I went on this cruise, and I went to New Zealand for a 14-day cruise, and I hardly remember any of it. I remember being carried up to my room one night by two of the guys that worked on the ship. Two little Filipino guys were trying to carry me. Oh. And there was another guy on the ship. He was an Australian guy, and he sang in one of the bars. He played guitar and sang, and I used to go in there, and I remember him singing a song about Mary, and I thought, wow, look, I'm special. And someone sort of pulled me aside and said, he's singing "Here Comes the Boat Drunk." So he was taking the mickey out of me. Yeah, so that was my cruise. I was so sick when I got back. Anyway, I parked myself up in the lounge room in this house, and every morning, watching the clock, I'd get up and I'd watch the clock, and as soon as it was like 5 to 8, I'd jump in my car and race down to the bottle shop and grab a couple of bottles of wine. And, this went on and on for a few weeks until, the way that I used to come off alcohol when I wasn't drinking, I had massive panic attacks and jitters and I was I'd shake until I couldn't even hold a pen. I couldn't even hold the bottle of wine, ended up drinking with 2 straws. I'd stick together and put the wine on the floor and suck it up that way. So I couldn't drive anymore. So one morning I got a taxi to the bottle shop, and I asked this taxi driver if he wouldn't mind going for me every morning. Could he come get the money off me and then go and pick up the booze and bring it back to me. And so that happened, and we had this little arrangement going on for quite some time, One morning, he's rocked up to pick up the money, and I didn't feel crash hot, I didn't feel well. I knew something was sort of up. He said to me, I went to give him the money, and he said, no, he goes, you look like, shit, basically. And he said, I'm going to take you up to the hospital. I'm not going to get you a drink until you get checked out at the hospital. So he's driven me up to the hospital, which wasn't far from my home, and I got out of the taxi, and apparently I just fell onto the ground and my heart stopped. And they had to revive me in a car park and all this sort of stuff, and I was going into liver failure. Really, that day, Bunbury's like a regional town. It's not very big. They don't have a lot of specialist doctors there, but on that day, there just happened to be a hepatologist who was visiting. That's a liver specialist, and the guy saved my life. And, I'm still in contact with him today. That's where the name sort of started, Miracle Mary, from him, because he didn't think I'd make it. No one thought I'd make it. I went into a sort of a coma, and they called my family aside and said she's either going to end up dead, palliative care, or respite. We're going to have to start making choices what to do with her, because she can't just, something's going to give. Anyway, I had, they were, by the time I sort of was a little bit conscious, I couldn't walk. I had no motor neuron skills. I had no hand-eye coordination, so I couldn't feed myself. I had water. It's called hydroencephalitis. So I had water on the brain, which is in fact Korsakoff's, which is we know what that is. And I was very, very sick. Very sick, and I started off in a wheelchair and in the hospital, and then I was on a sort of stand-up, sit-down walker for a while, and then I was on just a walker, and I was in hospital for over 2 months. And my sister, who was at this stage living in New South Wales, had been sober for nearly 16 years in the fellowship, and she was my saving grace. She came over and flew over and sat with me and showered me, and between her and my daughter, they just looked after me. And when I was ready to be released from the hospital, they would only release me on the condition that I went into a medically supervised rehab, because I was still so sick. So my sister flew me back to New South Wales, to Freeman House in Armidale, and the only reason I was allowed in there was because it was opposite a hospital, and they had visiting doctors into the rehab and stuff. And from that rehab, I went to my first meeting, my first AA meeting. It supported AA, but it didn't have in-house meetings, so you had to put your hand up if you wanted to go, and I did. I wanted to go. So off I went, and my first meeting, I thought, I hope there's not too many people there. And I knew that they asked you to sort of talk and stuff, and I was thinking, don't ask me. And I walked in, and it was like there would have been 50 people there. I nearly dropped dead. I was like, no, I was the second person they asked to share, and I can't remember what I said, but I remember my feet were shaking. I was still shaking from my illness as well, but my feet were shaking. All I could think of was people looking at my feet. And so I stayed in that rehab for 3 months, and I still, looking back, I thought I was really well. I thought I was physically, spiritually, emotionally well. I thought I had it all, and looking back, I was so sick still. And I was in the rehab for just over 3 months, and left there with some guy from the rehab. Someone said to me later on, "Oh, Mary, would you go to the junkyard to buy a new car?" Of course, that didn't work, and I got a year up. And I had the party, and I had the cake, and the children were so excited for me and proud of me, and the doctor said to me in no uncertain terms that if I drank again, I would die. And I drank again. I picked up. All that just went straight out the window, because, I hadn't accepted step one. I still thought somewhere in my silly mind that I could control my drinking, because I had controlled it for this year. I hadn't picked up a drink, so surely I could control having one or two. That's how I thought it would work. And of course, a week after drinking, I had no one talking to me again. My kids were just devastated. Oh, it was really awful. It was worse than when I was drinking in that lounge room on my own. I was so isolated and lonely, and I felt like such a failure. It was really awful. But I ended up, picking myself up, dusting myself off, and got off the pity potty and went back to my home group and admitted that I'd picked up, and they just welcomed me back with open arms, as we do. And that was a hard time for me, but I got through it, and And then I think another year and a half went by, and I picked up a drink. I had a couple of drinks in AR and at one afternoon. So I went on a bender for half a day again, and then after that I just thought, and even the half a day, everything went straight back to shit. I had a job at this stage, and I didn't go to work for 5 days after it because my nervous system automatically shot again. I was physically so sick. All the people around me weren't talking to me, and I still to this day don't know exactly what I did. They're too kind to tell me, I think, but I know I made a lot of phone calls, and I rang up my daughter apparently at 2 o'clock in the morning to tell her I loved her while I was drunk. It just broke her heart, Apparently she was asking me, have you been drinking, Mum? And I said no. And she said to me, she had my first grandchild, who I adore, and she said to me, Mum, she'd never ever pushed me away, but she said to me this day, Mum, you cannot be part of our lives. You cannot be around my son, being her son, my grandson, while you drink. Sorry, but no, and hung up on me. And I just, that was my rock bottom. That was just like someone had hit me in the face. I just was shocked. So I cried for a few days, and I decided that I was going to go in and do this properly, and I was going to throw the towel in, and I was going to really admit that I couldn't drink anymore, and really accept the fact that I wasn't going to drink anymore. And once I got to that point, a bit of serenity came over me. A few weeks later, I was sitting down at the beach one day, and I thought, wow, this is what I want. This is what I really want in my life. I want this peace of mind, and this guilt-free living, and it's like that. And I haven't picked up since. It's been 4 years, and I'm happy to say that I don't have to cringe every time I see alcohol anymore. That I don't have to worry about being triggered by other people drinking. I don't think about drinking anymore. One day at a time. I do this gig, and just got back from, in the last couple of weeks of travelling around Australia for 12 months, and had an absolute ball. Went from meeting to meeting to meeting, met new people, just had a ball. And all this stuff I wouldn't have been able to do. Stopped in and see my daughter, and she's now got a second child. Stopped in to see my son, who's had his first child. It was just amazing, and I wouldn't be able to do that without the help of the 12 steps and AA and the people in it. They've been magical, and and absolutely, as I said at the start, I'm so grateful. I must be the most grateful alcoholic I know. My life's just beautiful. I mean, there's still days when I have hiccups, but I've got all the little cliches. This too shall pass. All these little things have helped me along the way. The Serenity Prayer, that we use that like I used to use alcohol. It's just been wonderful. I've met so many lovely people in the fellowship, and I plan to stick around for a long, long time, one day at a time. And yeah, thanks for listening to me.